Ask yourself this. When was the last time you felt that someone was trying to control you? And how did it feel? How did you respond? The truth is, the way we try to control others reflects how we're managing our own anxieties and insecurities. Controlling others really is just an ineffective attempt to control ourselves. Today, we're going to deep dive into destructive strategy number 2, controlling others. You might be surprised by the subtle, sneaking ways that we all engage in control. Yes, I said it. All of us do it. This is a pattern and we all fall into it. Until we're willing to recognize it in ourselves, it will continue to negatively impact the people that we love most. Today on Master Your Marriage.
Welcome to another episode of Master Your Marriage. If you're new here, welcome. We appreciate you for being here. And just so you know, we do drop a new episode each and every week. So be sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss a single episode. And if you find value from today's episode, would you kindly consider leaving us a 5-star review and a comment? Now, today's episode is actually a continuation of a series that we started last week, which is on common but really destructive strategies that couples use in relationships. And we started this series by talking about how all relationships go through similar stages. And I kind of want to review that before we dig in today.
I think we've gone through all of these stages.
Well, I think most people have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So if you remember from last week, the first stage of love is this sort of blinded, meaning that we don't really see the truth of who we are and who we're developing a relationship with. But both people in the relationship present this very carefully curated version of themselves, showing each other only what they want their partner to see about them.
That's right. And during this stage, we have a lot of love and flattery that get expressed.
You're so beautiful all the time.
In all the possible ways.
Yep.
But the sad truth is that we're not really in love with the person that's right in front of us. We're in love with a facade. And in reality, we're actually a little more enamored with the image of ourselves that is actually being reflected back to us through the eyes of this person who validates us, praises us, makes us feel loved and valuable.
Yeah. And naturally, we adore everything about this person. I mean, why wouldn't we? And it feels wonderful to be affirmed and adored. But the truth is that we really don't know each other yet. Not at all.
Yeah. And this phase of relationships has a lot to do with hormones and neurotransmitters that are hijacking our brain. And what's interesting is research shows that the more in love you feel, those butterflies people talk about, the more dopamine is actually being flooded to your brain, which actually deactivates the part of your brain associated with the discernment. And that's something we've talked about before, like, are butterflies actually even really a good thing when people talk about, oh, I lost my butterflies? Okay, because that was the part of your brain that was being hijacked.
You lost the butterflies and you gained your common sense. But then after a period of time, the blinders come off and we start to really see our partner more honestly than we had in the past. And we begin to notice some of these discrepancies between what we expected from ourselves and from our partner and what we're actually getting. Dr. Terry Real calls this phase the crunch, or I call it the hitting the wall phase. Now, this stage is critical for couples, and this stage can make or break relationships. How you navigate this part of your relationship will have a massive impact on the level of happiness that you can attain together. Since relationship happiness is the number one predictor of overall life satisfaction, how you deal with these discrepancies will also have the largest impact on your overall health and life satisfaction.
Yeah. And these discrepancies, what we mean by discrepancies is this gap between what you expected and what you're actually, the reality of what you're getting. That's the discrepancy, right?
Which is everything in life.
Yes. It's the differences. That's when all the differences sort of come into play, when we see them more clearly.
And we start to see people as different than ourselves, which we're going to talk about.
But what do couples do when they hit the wall that Robert talks about, or the crunch that Dr. Terry Real talks about? Well, couples often resort to destructive strategies that in the moment when they're feeling those differences feel powerful, right? They feel in control. But in the long run, these strategies undermine the relationship. These strategies are all a way that couples are trying to reconcile that discrepancy between, again, the reality that they want versus the reality that is. And all of these destructive strategies fall into one of three categories. Okay. Either, number one, pressuring your partner to accept your reality, what you want, your desires, and to yield to what you want. Or
I've done that.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Or number two, they fit into the category of resentfully accommodating their partner in order to earn more approval, earn more love, earn more praise, earn more validation.
Yeah, that was me.
That was more you.
That was more me.
I was a little bit more number one.
Yeah.
Or number three, just completely disengaging, stonewalling, and then sort of limiting investment in the relationship. So all of these destructive strategies.
Been there.
Yeah, we've done that.
Yeah, I've done that too. So all destructive strategies that we participate in will fit into one of these three categories. The other commonality between these strategies is they just don't work. They're a lose-lose. You lose, your partner loses, the relationship loses. And unfortunately, we've all used these strategies, right? They're compelling to us because they temporarily get us out of this immediate discomfort, but they cause a whole bunch more heartache in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So last week we talked about the first strategy, which was the needing to be right strategy. And this is when I see you as thinking differently than me and I don't really want to change. And therefore I'm going to pressure you to come over to my side and do things and see things the way that I see and do things.
Right. We're, for example, going to do holidays the way I want to do them. We're going to raise the kids the way I want to raise them. We're going to organize the cupboards, whatever it is, right? The way that I want to do it, and so on. So today we're going to go into the second destructive strategy.
Ooh, there's another one?
We're going to do 7.
Okay,
actually.
Here we go.
So we're going to do this over several weeks. The second destructive strategy that couples commonly turn to is control, similar to the first one. But this destructive strategy, number 2, is controlling our partner. And once again, this is just another way to try to close that gap, to resolve that discrepancy between the reality that you want and the reality that you have. It's when you're hitting the wall. So you pressure your spouse to, again, yield to your wants and desires. And just like with strategy number 1, there's both overt and covert, or sneaky, ways to do this as well. So we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, and we're going to provide some examples in a moment. But in general term, men are more often conditioned to use more overt control tactics like intimidation, coercion, and threats. In contrast, women are typically conditioned and they tend to use more covert tactics such as psychological manipulation. And there's an old adage that illustrates this. And it goes like this: the man may be the head of the household, but the woman is the neck that twists the head.
Mm-hmm. You know what's funny? I actually heard somebody say that at church in the last week.
Right? That
Right.
hasn't gone away.
Which reminded me of it. And I think it was actually something that was said in My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I think that was a line that was from that movie as well. Yeah. And Helen Andelin actually wrote an entire book about this idea of, the woman is the neck. And she wrote it in the 1960s. It's quite insulting. It's called The Fascinating Womanhood. And the idea was that men may appear to be in control, but you know what? They're so stupid that you can still manipulate them and get them to do what you want. And this isn't just an old kind of thought process or way of thinking. There's more recent books. There was a book in the 90s called The Rules that came out, again, talking about the same sort of thing where letting a man think he's in control is great, but in reality, you are. And, I actually just went on Reddit for fun today just to see if there's conversations about this topic of women being the neck. And there are. So this topic is really even still going on today, and conversations are happening about it today.
That's funny.
I know.
That it still happens. So the idea that there's these overt and covert control systems seems as old as time. I mean, definitely as old as the 60s, yet it's really still very relevant, as Charlotte found out in her Reddit search, right? This is because the desire for control is really a human aspect. And we've all done it, and we all have different tactics of trying to get our desires to dominate in every situation.
That's right. Now, of course, this generalization that I just made about gender, right? That men use overt control, women use covert control. It's not always the case. Of course, our upbringing probably shapes that more than anything.
Yeah.
And what tactics we saw our parents use are probably the tactics that we use. I probably saw more overt control tactics growing up because the women in my life, my mom, my grandmother, they're strong women.
Strong women, yeah.
Also, I would say aggressive women. And because of that, I feel like I'm oftentimes the exception to some of these gender stereotypes. And I would say that I definitely use both the overt and covert styles of control. But in my relationship with you, I for sure used more of the overt, right? There was no beating around the bush.
Yeah, but I think it was a little bit of both. And without a doubt, I was guilty of several of those, probably stonewalling and resentful accommodation.
Yes.
So let's talk a little more generally about the idea of control and why we do it. And then we'll look at some specific examples. So one of the things that our brain wants to do as a safety mechanism is to control our environment. We all do, but other people are a part of our environment. So naturally, our brain is instinctively trying to control the people and the people around us. And this is where we run into trouble. So we think about our brain wanting to do this. And so I'll give an example of my brother-in-law, actually my two brother-in-laws. They both had these blue heelers. It's an Australian herding dog. And when you talk about like your brain wanting to control, I think about them. Like every time we had a party and the kids, the Australian, the blue heeler would run around and herd the kids and keep them in the backyard. It was just controlling, just out of instinct. Nobody told it to do that. It would just run around and sort of yip and push the kids back into the yard and keep them on the grass. And I think about that when I think about your brain as like just trying to control people around you. Not like really like, oh, I have to control this person and that person, but it's constantly looking for a way to control its environment and to control people, much like that.
Well, just like the dogs are actually trying to keep the children safe, much the same way your brain is trying to keep you safe. It doesn't do these things
it's not malice.
Out of malice. It does usually everything that it does out of protection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our brain has a need for certainty. It needs to know that we can control things and that life will unfold in a predictable way because that is how it would feel safe. But our life is inherently uncontrollable and uncertain. So, and I think one of the most unpredictable variables in our life, of course, are other people. We have no real ability to control what someone else thinks, what someone else does, what someone else thinks of us, even though our brain often tricks us into believing that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Or us thinking that maybe it's a good idea to do that.
Right.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Another reason our brain kind of craves control is that it actually conserves energy. So just think about this, right? Once our brain sort of learns a way of thinking and doing, it repeats that pattern of thought and that pattern of action just to save energy, to save calories. And this is why so much of our life runs on autopilot. I mean, think about when I drove to work. I don't remember turning left or right.
Nope.
Like it's just on autopilot. Do you know that our brain, here's a fun fact, consumes 20% of our daily caloric intake?
20%.
Just in thinking.
Isn't that interesting? Our son always has these fun facts. And I think he's the one that first shared that with me. He said, Mom, do you know how many calories these chess players that never move out of their chairs expend in a chess match that might last an entire day? It's like 3 times more than a normal person would expend in calories in a day, just because of the mental deliberation, the mental activity that's going on.
So when it comes to the safety sort of thinking of your brain, right? How do I expend less energy? How do I work on something that's predictable? How do I keep things in its organized little patterns, right? To reduce energy, the brain tries to automate as many of these tasks as possible so we don't have to think about it, so it can just get done. Right. But this only works when things are predictable, right? My car I turn right, I turn left, I turn right. But there's certainly less predictability with the things that we face in our life, right? And the more that we try to manage this unpredictability, the more our brain revolts, trying to steer us back to the certainty and this predictability. This is why we fight so hard to control our environment. Yeah. And it's easy to see why we do it. But when we try to control relationships and we try to control other people, it backfires. Miserably so. Miserably
so, and destroys relationships.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sneaky and unsuspecting ways that we try to gain this control. And You know what? If you're like most people, if you're like most of my clients, you're probably sitting here listening to this going, I don't do that. I don't try to control my partner.
Oh, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But control isn't always so obvious. And when we're truly being honest, you know what? We've all done it. I've done it.
I've done it.
And we all continue to do it. And at its core, our need for control usually stems from our inability to manage our own insecurities and our own anxieties.
So let's look at some specific examples of control that might not be initially recognized in ourselves, right? And the first one would be criticism, insults, or degrading comments.
Oh, we've heard about criticism before, haven't we?
Yeah. This is more, of course, more overt than covert. And as John Gottman's research shows, the criticism is one of the four horsemen. It's one of the predictors of divorce because it can escalate relationship conflict. Criticism occurs when we tell someone what they're doing or what they want is wrong. So you want to do a couple of examples?
Let's do a few examples.
Yeah.
You know what? What is the deal here with the dishwasher? You loaded the dishwasher all wrong.
Did the dishes get clean? Oh, wait, we're just doing examples.
Yeah.
Like who taught you how to fold towels?
My mom.
Oh, that's wrong.
Well, you never do anything around here at the house. You're so lazy.
I do something, but you're such a hoarder and a pig.
Well, you're financially irresponsible. And you know what? I think that's really selfish.
Yeah, but you won't spend a red cent. You're so stingy. I love these, by the way.
Well, you're a prude. You never want to have sex.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Something must be wrong with you.
Yeah, you act like a child. Do I have to do everything around here? It's a lot of you statements there, isn't there?
There's a lot. Yeah. Criticism often sounds like a character attack, and it definitely often includes a few you statements or always statements or never statements.
Yeah.
And it may or may not have a little air of contempt sort of blended in there with it, which we know is another predictor for divorce. And this ties back to a lot of what we talked about last week in our discussion about that need to be right. Because where we believe there's a right way to do things, which is, of course, our way, not our partner's way, then we use criticism as a way to force our partner to do things our way.
Yeah. And another way that we can exert control is through blame.
Blame.
Right? This involves sort of dodging responsibilities. Not my fault. Right? Refusing to acknowledge how our actions would impact the relationship.
Yep.
Since, this taking responsibility always comes with these uncomfortable situations, right? And most people just shift the blame to someone else. The dog did it. I didn't mean to do it. The wind blew.
It was your fault.
Yeah, it was your fault. And a common example is blaming other people for how you feel, much like a 3-year-old would. He made me so angry.
It's your fault. I'm so sad.
Yeah.
You made me mad. It's your fault. I'm angry.
You didn't make me happy.
Right. And doing that, as you can even hear it in that tone.
A little sarcasm on our side. Sorry.
Right. You can even hear how we have to sort of play the victim to do that, to blame someone else. So now I have to put myself into the role of a victim, which of course every victim needs what? A villain.
Yeah. They need a
So
villain.
to regain a sense of control, what these victims will sometimes do is they'll start to share their story with other people to get agreement from others to build a case against the villain in the story. And this is a tactic called triangulation.
Yeah.
And this is another way that we try to control our partner. And you see this all the time. You see people trying to triangulate with their girlfriends or their guy friends, going to even strangers at the Starbucks or going to family members, parents, maybe even their own adult children. And what's happening is it's a way to get someone on your side against this other person in a triangle in order to try to control that person.
I remember our kids were really good at this triangulation.
Oh, kids are great at it. You have to be careful with letting
listen,
them.
we're going to limit your computer time. Well, Billy's mom lets him play on the
Dad
computer
said,
as much as he wants.
Mom
right?
doesn't do that.
Now you're in this triangle. You're a bad parent if you don't agree with Billy's mom.
Right.
Yeah. So another way that we gain control is making the other person maybe feel guilty.
Oof.
Right? Guilt tripping the other person to make them feel so bad that they'll eventually sort of change their behavior and maybe come over to your side.
Ooh, let's do a few examples
Okay,
of guilt
so if
tripping.
you weren't such a prude, you would just have sex with me and I wouldn't have to look at porn. Geez, that's a nice one.
Hey, these are real stories.
Yeah, they are.
Right?
Okay.
Are you going out with your friends again tonight? Well, I sit here all alone at home doing nothing.
I guess I'll load the dishwasher again. It's not like I haven't done all the cleaning already today.
And the lawn and
the lawn, yeah.
And the trailer.
Yeah.
And fixing everything. If you hadn't spent so much money on the kids' back to school clothes, I think we could probably afford our bills this month.
Ooh, that's brutal. I am so embarrassed by how you acted when we're out to dinner with our friends.
Oh. So guilt tripping.
I feel like that was good.
That was good. Oh,
yeah.
I made me stop for a second. So guilt tripping is a common way that we can manipulate someone into feeling guilty so that they feel obligated to do things our way.
Yeah, what can I do to make it right? I'm sorry I screwed up dinner last night.
So this leads to another similar tactic of control, similar to guilt, which is gaslighting. And gaslighting is a manipulative, often covert tactic where one person distorts reality, making the other person kind of doubt themselves, making them feel a little crazy, maybe doubt what they think happened, their perceptions of what happened. And you can do this to someone by flat out denying facts, altering facts or events, or questioning the person's sanity or memory. And really, it's a way to deflect responsibility again, and cause the other person to sort of question themselves, question their sanity, and a little bit feel guilty so that they're more easy to control. So let me give you an example of what that might sound like. Gaslighting might sound like, I don't know how you could ever question me or say such things about me. You know, none of that you just said about me, Robert, is true. I have done nothing to be a bad wife. In fact, I have always tried to be the best wife possible. I've given you everything and more. I feel like I've given my life for you and this family, right? So I'm deflecting, not taking responsibility, and I'm making you sound like whatever complaint maybe you brought to me or request is crazy.
Yeah, I'm crazy. I can't believe you've done so much for us. Man, I should just go back to doing what you want me to do.
Right. Gaslighting.
Wow. Okay. Another method of control is through this emotional manipulation. And it's common in households for one person to sort of be in control of the atmosphere with their emotions, whether it's sadness or sulking or depression or anger. Everyone else in the house must sort of run and hide or conform to manage this person's sort of overactive and intense emotions. Clients often share with us how they spend their childhood walking on eggshells around a parent who is easily angered or triggered, hiding in their rooms to avoid their wrath. And this is a way to use emotions to get other people to essentially act and behave and do what you want.
I think, what's interesting is in working with clients, I would say the majority of them, as they talk about their childhood and some of the examples they watched, a good percentage of them had a parent that dominated the house this way,
with emotion,
where they controlled through some sort of big emotion, whether it was anger or sadness, depression.
And it could be anything. It could be just, maybe you're just overly anxious or, any of those types of things, letting that run the show. I mean, I had that in my house. My mom would sort of fly off the handle a lot. So we were just,
everybody
stay on the down low.
Stay on the down low.
Keep your head down.
Keep your head down.
Yeah.
And so many of the behaviors we've discussed so far today, they can, when played out to extremes, they can become abusive.
Absolutely.
However, that doesn't mean that if you've used one of these behaviors that you're abusive. Okay. I want that to be clear because most of us have engaged in one or more of these behaviors at some point in time. We probably still do on occasion to some degree. But there is a place where they can cross a line into emotional abuse, and we want to be cognizant of that. When we try to gain power and control over someone by making them feel bad, by feeling intimidated, by feeling inferior or guilty or crazy, we're attempting to steal their choice. We're attempting to steal their autonomy.
Never good.
And force them to come over to our side and see things our way. And that's where we cross a line into an area that we really don't want to enter.
Yeah. There are so many more examples of control that we could probably discuss.
I think we could talk about this for an hour.
Yeah, but let's focus on one last example, and perhaps the most subtle of all, which is trying to control how other people perceive you.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a different one.
Isn't it interesting how often we believe that we can try to control what other people think of us? We've all tried to shape other people's perceptions of us at some point through either avoiding topics or bending the truth, or even through, over explaining our position. It's a common behavior, even though we really have no control over how people see us or view us. We'll dive deeper into this, when we get to that destructive strategy number 6.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about this in a future episode, but
So stay tuned for that.
I was going to mention really quick how recently I actually noticed this behavior in myself in something I did recently. So a few weeks ago, I posted something somewhat controversial on Instagram. Shocking, I know.
Yeah, really, you?
Right. About kind of the downside of validation and when it can become a problem. And of course, people don't like that because everyone loves to be validated. And so a few of the comments that I received were pretty harsh. And so I started taking a step back because I noticed that I was really over explaining myself to people in the comments, trying to ensure that they understood, make them understand this concept that I was sharing. And I noticed myself getting a little bit flooded, a little bit overwhelmed by some of the comments, and reacted in such a way where I was trying to control the narrative and trying to control how people perceived me. And we just can't do that, right? We can't control how other people see us. But I took a step back and realized I was doing it mostly through over-explaining myself, attempting to manage other people's perceptions. And that is a sneaky way that we try to control others.
Yeah, we all do it.
Yeah.
We all do all of these things, just to varying degrees.
But the truth is control isn't real.
Yeah.
It's an illusion. You might manipulate someone, like, i.e. your spouse, your partner, into doing what you want. You might convince them to have sex with you. You might convince them to buy you that diamond ring or that thing that you want. You might convince them to mow the lawn or do the dishes, but
it's really going to come back and bite you. It really will. And it comes with a heavy cost. There's a cost for getting your way because each of us has this fundamental need for autonomy. And when we start to feel that our autonomy is violated, this damages the relationship. It damages trust. It undermines intimacy. It builds emotional walls. And eventually your spouse will rebel.
Yes.
Either through just resentment or passive aggressive behavior, or maybe even just completely disconnecting from the relationship.
Just totally withdrawing.
Yeah.
Because I think people can only be pushed into tyranny so far. And that's
Absolutely.
what it is. When you're stepping on someone's autonomy, you're pushing yourself into tyranny, and people will only take that for so long before they resist and it comes with a very, very high cost.
It does. Yeah.
So it's easy to hear these patterns and think, you know what, that's not me.
Yeah, I don't do that.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
You might even find yourself thinking of someone else who fits the bill better than you as we share all of these different examples. But I want you to pause and resist that urge. Instead of pointing the finger at someone else, I encourage you to turn inward and ask yourself, how do I do this? In what way am I using control in my relationship? Because the truth is, we all engage in these behaviors to some extent. We just tend to notice them more in other people.
Yeah. As we often say, marriage is this people growing machine, and relationships are our greatest teachers. They are, especially our closest relationships. They're going to teach us the most. And it may not always feel that way, especially during the tough times, but these challenges are here to help us grow and to help us learn. And we're not really driven to change when everything is going smoothly. Mm-hmm. It's only when when the road gets a little rocky and it gets difficult, these patterns emerge, that we have the opportunity for self-reflection. Can we recognize our limitations? Can we identify areas for improvement? I view these patterns as part of our natural tendencies, the parts of ourselves we need to overcome to become better versions of ourselves.
That's right.
Bring our best self to the relationship.
That's right.
And we need each other to do that. We need each other to reflect back those things that we're not naturally able to see in ourselves.
Right. Because we don't want to see those things in ourselves.
Oh, no.
We have to go through some of these hard times to see the way in which our immature and patterns are affecting the people that we profess to love the most.
The hardest thing to do is to ask someone you love to tell you how you can grow, how you can love them better this week, how you can relate to them better. And that's that reflection. Your partner will often give you the reflection you need if you just ask them in a kind way. And this takes a lot of growing to get to that point.
So we want to leave you with a couple of journaling questions to consider this week.
Yeah, I hope you liked last week's journaling questions. I thought they were really cool. So
the first question we want to give you this week to contemplate is first to reflect on moments when you feel your relationship is in the crunch that we talked about, the wall, hitting the wall. In other words, when do you find yourself frustrated by not getting what you want? When are you seeing that gap between the relationship and the life that you thought you were going to have versus the one that you have?
Right.
Just identify when you're really feeling that.
Yeah. And number 2, so how are you using control to bridge this gap? Consider whether it was one of the examples that we discussed today or maybe something else. And how is the strategy of you using control hurting your spouse or partner?
And your relationship as a side effect of that.
Yeah.
The number 3, the next question you might consider is, what might your best self strive to do in these situations where you're really feeling the crunch? What might your best self do differently next time you feel that urge to control?
Yeah. And finally, consider sharing your observations with your partner. Focus on your behavior. This is what I did, not their behavior. What do you recognize in yourself that might be hurtful or immature? And then share that with your partner.
Yeah, that can be really powerful when we just come forward and say, without blaming, without guilting, without trying to turn it back on them and say, well, you suck too, but just to come in and say, you know what, I've been reflecting and I notice the ways that I've been doing X, Y, Z, and I want to get better. I want to work on this. There's a lot of power in that.
There's a lot of power in just bringing this vulnerability into the relationship and even admitting, I was watching just a quick podcast interview with somebody who was, I think he had ADD and I wish I remembered his name at this point in time, but he said, it helps me if I share with my children that because they may see the seriousness in my face and the stress and they may be concerned and they may not know what's going on. And he said, if I just share with my children and say, hey, look, daddy's got like an important phone call and I'm a little bit worried about it right now. Like, I'm not mad at you. I just want you to know what's going on. And I think that if we do that with our partners as well, like, hey, I got this thing in my head and I'm not trying to be, and I may be short and I may be not as caring and kind as I could be because this other thing is bugging me, but let me get past this and I will get back to you. So I just want to let you know it's not you, that it's just me. And this is the weakness that I'm going through. Mm-hmm. I think creating that kind of vulnerability in those types of conversations could also bring some benefit.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, this has been a great episode. I think this will be a wrap for today, but make sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't yet, because then in the next week's episode, we're going to be moving on to the destructive pattern number 3 that commonly plagues relationships. Thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful for all of you. We kindly ask, if you haven't yet, please leave a comment and a 5-star review. It really does help us to make a greater impact and to be able to therefore help more couples. And if you do know someone that this episode might help, please consider sharing it with them.
And of course, be kind to each other. Take care of each other this week. And remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest impact.